So, real quick before we get into today's video, man, Queen brought to my attention yesterday that a few people have been emailing her saying that somebody was trying to reach out to them impersonating me on Telegram. Listen, y'all, that is not me. So Queen had to take some steps and actions and get with YouTube to try to get this problem resolved. But listen, I wanted to make this announcement here. If you don't hear me verbally say, hey, meet me on Telegram or Patreon or something else, then be careful. That is not me. All right? So I appreciate the emails from you guys letting me know of it. And we're working with YouTube right now to get it resolved. All right? So here we go. For the real reason we are here today, man, they've got some more new discoveries and developments in Egypt. So this video is titled, This Discovery in Egypt Scares Scientists. So we're going to check this video out. If you're new, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. Here we go.
Ancient Egypt has fascinated researchers, historians, and scientists for millennia. You only need to look at their ancient pyramids and mysterious tombs to see that this is a very advanced civilization and way beyond its years, and still stumping experts today.
It is surprisingly small.
It's not at all what you'd expect for royalty. It is very strange, this.
Here are 15 mysterious discoveries in Egypt that scare scientists. Nefertiti Statue. Our first topic is Queen Nefertiti, who's well known to most historians of ancient Egypt. But ask them what happened to her after 1336 BC, and they'll tell you that we simply don't know. Historians contend that she simply died, but there are no records of her death, and given her prominence in Egyptian society and the huge emphasis Egyptians place on commemorating the dead, this has been seen as very suspicious. Egyptologist Dietrich Wildung noticed that this statue of her has been aging like a human being. She started to display bags under her eyes and wrinkles around her neck. It was this discovery that really shocked scientists. The monument.
Another reason why I couldn't work in a museum. See, stuff like that would mess me up, would bother me. I wouldn't walk past that statue.
Which has been hypnotizing viewers since it was put on display in 1923, continues to stir up controversy and political debate. Germany takes pride in holding such an amazing statue, while modern-day Egypt quite understandably wants it back. And it's easy to see why it's caused so much tension. The absence of an eye led to conjecture that Nefertiti may have lost her eye due to an ophthalmic illness. However, the presence of an iris in other sculptures of her refuted this theory. Hey, did you know that if you smash the like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell, you're more likely to win the lottery? So what are you waiting for? Colorful coffins. As you may already know, the ancient Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife, and their methods of burying the dead were their attempt to help them on their journey to the next life. Ancient cities had things known as necropolis, which would be a very large and elaborate cemetery just outside of a major city. In October 2020, Egypt discovered yet another necropolis of ancient coffins, revealing the finding of more than 80 sarcophagi. A sarcophagus is a container which you can place a coffin into. This would add to the preservation of the body and protect it from tomb raiders and scavenging animals. According to a statement from the Tourism and Antiquities Ministry, researchers have discovered a group of colorful, sealed coffins that were buried more than 2,500 years ago. Campbell Price, the curator of Egypt and Sudan at the Manchester Museum, told the art newspaper, coffin caches of this type are far from exceptional, but they tend to come from Luxor in the south. The real value of the recent find is the light these examples throw onto northern coffin styles, and no doubt also names and titles that previously have not been firmly associated with the Saqqara area. Broken nose statues. A real issue that stumped researchers and historians is the recurrence of statues with broken noses.
See, now I'm not going to be able to look at these statues the same without thinking about, like Nefertiti, them saying her statue aging like a person, like a real person. Now I'm going to be looking at all these statues the same, thinking about that.
The pharaohs, religious dignitaries, and affluent members of ancient Egypt society were celebrated in the many statues they carved. So it's strange to see so many statues that have been vandalized in a very specific way. The prevalence of this broken nose epidemic makes you wonder if these smashed sniffers were the result of random accidents or if something more sinister was going on. There are some theories. Many Egyptians thought that statues had a life power, which is why these statues had damaged noses. According to a curator of the Metropolitan Museum of the Arts Department of Egyptian Art, the best way to disable a statue if an opposing power came across one that it wanted to was to break off its nose. Edward Blakeberg from the Brooklyn Museum told Artsy.net, the consistency of the patterns where damage is found in sculpture suggests that it's purposeful. The damaged part of the body is
It gotta be. I don't believe in too many coincidences, bro. So to see that many statues with the noses gone, it's gotta be something.
no longer able to do its job. Without a nose, the statue's spirit ceases to breathe, so that the vandal was effectively killing it. To hammer the ears off a statue of a god would make it unable to hear a prayer. 100 Forgotten Coffins. In November 2020, 100 forgotten coffins were found south of the capital, Cairo. Another fascinating necropolis was found. The findings found preserved antique coffins, some of which contained mummies and 40 statues. The steel sarcophagi, along with the golden masks and amulets, were buried more than 2,500 years ago in burial shafts and still bear intricate painted artwork. They're believed to belong to the wealthiest citizens during that time, mainly because their coffins are covered in gold. Egyptian archaeologists believe that there were workshops dedicated to making these coffins somewhere, but they simply haven't found them yet. Golden mummies. In 1996, another 2-square-mile necropolis with several significant tombs was found by archaeologists. The cemetery became renowned as Valley of the Golden Mummies after it was discovered that 4 of the graves contained 105 well-preserved mummies, many of which had intricate golden masks. Archaeologists were astonished at how remarkably well-preserved they had been for over 2,000 years. However, it's believed that there may be up to 10,000 mummies buried within the cemetery, making the first find only the top of the iceberg. The designs for the coffins could be broken down into 4 different designs. The first design, which was discovered on about 60 mummies, features a golden face mask and a waistcoat with a chest-length representation of various gods and goddesses. The second design is coated in cartonnage and features images of gods, including the god of mummification Anubis and his 4 offspring. The third style was buried inside an anthropoid, a pottery coffin, rather than being adorned with gold or cartonnage. The fabric for the fourth design was linen. The oldest pyramid. The first pyramid that the Egyptians ever erected was the Step Pyramid of Djoser, which was built at Saqqara roughly 4,700 years ago. The third dynasty of Egypt was controlled by the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Djoser. Imhotep, who subsequently became a god for his many achievements, is credited by scholars with planning the pyramid. Egyptologists,
Even for it being the oldest pyramid, it still looks to be holding up and in decent shape. Like, that to me continues to be mind-blowing.
Reg Clark claimed in his book, Securing Eternity, Ancient Egyptian Tomb Protection from Prehistory to the Pyramids, that pharaohs were once buried in smaller mastaba tombs that thieves might enter by digging in from the top. According to Clark, it would have been incredibly hard for a thief to access the burial chamber by excavating it from the top of the Step Pyramid of Djoser. The Step Pyramid may have been constructed by ancient Egyptians as protection against grave robbers. This theory may become even more clear throughout the video. Ushapti. Ushapti is a generally mummiform figurine of about 5 to 30 centimeters found in many ancient Egyptian tombs. They're commonly made of blue or green glazed Egyptian faience, but can also consist of stone, wood, clay, metal, and glass. The meaning of the Egyptian term is still debated. However, one possible translation is answerer, as they were believed to answer their master's call to work in the afterlife. The burial process was all about helping the deceased in the afterlife, so this figure is possibly a servant for them in the afterlife. Believe it or not, at one stage, a pharaoh's servants would be sacrificed and killed, then buried along with their master. Through time, this quite cruel ritual was abandoned in favor of these statues. There's also the debate about whether these were surrogate or spare tombs. If the original tomb was damaged, this spirit could be hosted in this empty tomb instead. So the Egyptians were well aware that grave robbers might just get the main tomb and ignore the less impressive tombs beside them. Tutankhamun trumpet. What if I told you that the ancient Egyptians were still impacting major events today? They haven't come back to life, but an unearthed trumpet is something many people believe to be cursed. One of the priceless artifacts taken from the Cairo Museum during the recent upheaval was Tutankhamun's trumpet. This 3,000-year-old instrument is the oldest trumpet in the world and was not used how trumpets are used today. In 1939, the BBC asked permission to play the trumpet and play it on the radio. Expecting to hear some beautiful Egyptian sound, it actually sounded terrible. For this trumpet, notes were not meant to be played at the same time, which is standard practice for a modern trumpeter. It was played a second time and it broke. But here's where the mystery lies. This was played in 1939, a year before World War II. The next time it was played was in 1967, just before a war broke out between Egypt and Israel. It was played again in 1990, just before the first Gulf War, and in 2011, just before the Egyptian Arab Spring. Since then, the trumpet has become too fragile to play again. A lot of people believe that this is a blessing in disguise and the trumpet itself is cursed.
Is it cursed? Or is it making the sound that it's supposed to make, where our ears are accustomed to what a trumpet sounds like in modern times? So is it broken? Well, now it's broken because it's done went through a ton of, you know what I mean? It's time and it's starting to deteriorate and it's fragile, of course. But the sound that it made when they first tried was just probably the sound they needed back then. You know what I mean?
Crocodile mummy. Egypt is along the River Nile, and the river's crocodiles simply fascinated the ancient Egyptians. It could live on land and water and was one of the most powerful creatures on earth, so Egyptians even hunted large crocodiles and mummified them as they would for humans. A wild crocodile was struck with a club by an Egyptian mummy vendor who sneaked up on it several thousand years ago, fractured its head, and killed the animal. These animals were sacrificed to appease the god Sobek, a crocodile god. They feared that if they did not make offerings to Sobek, he would not flood the Nile and fertilize the land. The animal was swiftly transported for processing, its damaged skull repaired. Salts, oils, and resins were applied to its body, which was then wrapped in several layers of linen. It still had some of its most recent food in it, and some of them are fakes.
I was just about to say, yo, that's well preserved, but to hear that it still had stomach contents, that's beyond preserved, bro.
2. When Western archaeologists were exploring these tombs, they got so tired of seeing crocodiles and not humans that one of them threw one of the mummified crocodiles in frustration. It broke and was stuffed with paper. The wooden priest. The Egyptians were undoubtedly incredibly skilled craftsmen and artists. Ancient artisans had a thriving industry populating the numerous tombs and temples around the country with their famous funerary statues. Archaeologists have continually found beautiful masterpieces that continue to astound spectators throughout the past many centuries. One of the scribes and priests, Kapar, is shown in one of these fabled statues. This wooden figurine is a work of art that's so lifelike and beautifully crafted that it's nearly defying belief. The stunningly detailed and hyper-realistic statue showcases the extraordinary talent of the prehistoric craftspeople. Little is known about the person behind this statue, other than he was a famous priest and scribe. The fact that he had his own statue must mean that he was an incredibly respected figure. The unusual aspect of this statue is that it includes the person's imperfections. Normally, statues would glorify or would be highly complimentary of the person's appearance. This statue was truer to its real appearance. It's also one of the few wooden statues we have from ancient Egypt, as stone was a lot more preferable due to its durability. The spinning statue. Curators at a British museum had been puzzled by the ability of an ancient Egyptian statue to spin on its glass shelf seemingly of its own volition for months. There were numerous rumors that the figurine was cursed by an Egyptian god or that the ghost of its owner had entered it and caused it to tremble. Others offered more mundane explanations, speculating that the statue's motion was caused by a magnetic field. But now, a British engineer has found the solution, figuring out that the 3,800-year-old stone statue was spinning due to tiny vibrations from traffic and footsteps from bystanders. Dr. Campbell Price, a curator at the Manchester Museum, told NPR that if the person in the statue is who he thinks he is, then he would be delighted that this amazing anomaly happened. He told NPR, "The statue represents a gentleman, we think. We're not quite sure of the reading of the hieroglyphics of a man called Nebsenu, and he lived around 1800 BC. So he's about 3,800 years old. He would have been a high-ranking official, and ancient Egyptians wanted to be remembered after they passed away. And I don't think Nebsebu could have had any greater publicity. He could not have dreamed."
Y'all buying that though? I'm just saying, it could very well be the truth and the reasoning behind why it's moving, but are y'all buying that one? If I'm there and you tell me that, I'd probably have a hard time accepting it, although it may be true.
Game of Death. The Egyptians were very competitive and loved playing the board game Senet. Senet, which means passing, first appeared in the Old Kingdom approximately 5,000 years ago. It was a game similar to backgammon that evolved into a dark fixation with death similar to a modern Ouija board. It swiftly gained traction over the Nile River Valley. Two players would move pawns across the board after rolling an archaic kind of dice on a Senet board, which had 3 rows and 10 squares in each row. With the exception of squares 26 through 29, which had symbols that are still unknown to this day, the majority of the squares remained blank. The winner was the first person to get all of their pawns to the last square, in this instance, the 30th. It was a fun game, but it eventually evolved into a symbol for the journey into the afterlife. The pieces along the board then mirrored the movements of the soul throughout the afterworld. This is believed to have happened gradually over time, and some boards had a mix of spiritual and secular figures.
And I thought Jumanji was a game I never wanted to play in my life. This one trumps it.
The Book of the Dead. And it's easy how you can see how a board game evolved into something about the dead. The afterlife was one big quest for the Egyptians, as outlined by the Book of the Dead. This book is one of the most amazing artifacts from this time period. Egyptians were one of the first civilizations to record events on paper, or what was then called papyrus. This book, the most well-known collection of Egyptian writing, comprises a number of magical formulas or spells meant to safeguard the deceased. The dead were also given simple maps so they might find their way throughout the afterlife. These spells were initially reserved for pharaohs and other affluent people in society, but over time, these spells started to be made available to ordinary citizens. You would initially be greeted by the god Anubis, who had a jackal-headed skull. Anubis has a scale and would compare the weight of your heart to an ostrich feather. With the exception of the heart, every organ would be removed during mummification by a group of priests. The individual spirit must first navigate the creatures and demons of the world known as the Duat before encountering Anubis. The ghost can use the magic and spells from the Book of the Dead to fend off or avoid these creatures. 40 priests then judged the spirit to see if the deceased lived a good life. Although there were 42 sins that one may do in ancient Egypt, the main prohibitions included lying, stealing, cheating, and murder. After passing by these priests, the individual encounters the god of Anubis, who makes the ultimate decision on their fate. This was the moment of truth for ancient Egyptians, but there wasn't heaven and hell like in Christianity. Sure, there is a heaven. If you lived a good life, you get to spend the rest of eternity in this amazing paradise. But if you've been bad, you don't go to hell. Instead, the goddess Amumet would eat you up. Cursed Pharaoh. As we alluded to earlier, Tutankhamun was one of Egypt's greatest ever pharaohs. He became a leader when his father died when he was just 8 or 9 years old and ruled Egypt for a decade due to his early death at 18 or 19. During his leadership, he made a lot of social reforms, so he was very well liked by the Egyptians. As one of Egypt's greatest leaders, you would think that he would naturally have one of the greatest ever tombs. In a strange twist of fate, his tomb was incredibly shoddy. The ancient Egyptians did not want any of their tombs being disturbed, as they were full of precious diamonds and artifacts. They were also regularly robbed too. So ironically, the ancient Egyptians were so concerned that Tutankhamun's tomb would become disturbed that they made it look incredibly shoddy and threw grave robbers off the scent. This tomb wasn't discovered until 100 years ago in 1922. According to the Daily Express, what Mr. Carter found was not a tomb fit for a great king, but one that was small, shoddily fitted, and extremely obscure. The very reason why it had not been found by anyone for thousands of years. Other theories about why his tomb isn't up to scratch are because he died so unexpectedly young that his tomb was rushed. Another theory claims that Tutankhamun's successor took him out of his original tomb and placed him in a much worse one so he could have the better one for himself.
See, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it was robbed and he was placed into that, something along the lines of that, because we've all known, or what we've been told or led to believe, is that when they were buried, and if you were someone of importance, you were buried with treasures, jewels, all that type of stuff. You know what I'm saying? So I just don't see him not being buried the traditional way.
His tomb also contains black spots, which are believed to be caused by the fact that it was sealed before the paint was even allowed to dry. Ship to the afterlife. Lastly, we'll be taking a look at the world's oldest ship. The afterlife to the ancient Egyptians is a long journey. It's such a harrowing journey that they built an entire ship to assist the deceased in the next world. As we mentioned before with the Book of the Dead, Egyptians believed that there were almost an adventure-style movie you needed to travel through to save yourself. So having a boat with them could come in quite handy too. The Khufu Ship, an ancient Egyptian pharaoh's barge, was found inside the Great Pyramid of Giza 65 years ago. The 4,600-year-old wooden ship was apparently so well designed that it could still sail if it were relaunched onto the Nile today. It was the pharaoh Khufu that built the pyramid, Egypt's biggest and most famous one. It was the tallest building in the world until the 13th century. His legacy is mixed. He was believed to be a great leader, but at the same time, he used slaves to make his amazing pyramid for himself. His ship was found by an Egyptian archaeologist who discovered it in different pieces and simply had to put it back together again. According to PBS, realizing the treasure he had on his hands, he took 20 months to remove the boat's 1,224 separate pieces. Then a fellow Egyptian led a team that painstakingly reconstructed the vessel. And the ship has also sailed on this video, which brings us to the end. If there are any mysterious findings from Egypt we've missed out on, let us know in the comment section below. We're sure to cover more videos on Egypt.
Listen, I know. Y'all ain't gonna be able to never look at these statues the same, especially the ones with the nose going. I know. It's still mind-blowing to me as well. You know, some stuff you just wish, sometimes you be like, oh man, why did they have to ruin that for me? Because I can't go back now. Every time I see one, it's gonna mess with me. It's crazy. But y'all get at me in the comment section, man. Let me know what you thought of this video, bro. And stick around and stay tuned. Till next one, I'm gone. Peace.